Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omniviewer, and welcome to Genre Bender's Obscurities and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. Question: when is a Universal horror movie not a Universal horror movie? Answer: when it's Columbia's The Return of the Vampire, a 1943 film that so closely resembles Universal horror that I bet it's fooled a lot of people over the years. Heck, it even has Bela Lugosi in it as a vampire. But don't get to thinking that this movie is just a shameless knockoff, because this movie actually deserves a lot of respect. The film begins where most vampire movies usually end. In the year 1918, a strange affliction is harming the women of the Ainsley family in London. Dr. Saunders is called in, and his examinations lead him to a shocking conclusion. The family is being targeted by a vampire named Armand Tesla. Saunders and Lady Ainsley go searching for the fiend and are lucky enough to find him in a nearby graveyard. They waste little time impaling the bloodsucker with a spike through the heart, lifting his curse from the family and from his werewolf slave, Andreas. Years later, in 1940, Lady Jane and Andreas continue to hunt vampires and conduct medical research, even as Europe is plunged into war. And H.G. Wells thought that medical research would have to stop during World War II. He was silly that way. During a German air raid, a bomb hits the graveyard where Tesla has lain dead, freeing him. He immediately reclaims control over Andreas and starts hatching a plan. It seems that Tesla holds a grudge against Lady Jane for doing him in low those many years ago, and he's going to exact sweet revenge on her as only a vampire can, by targeting her son and his fiancée. As if that wasn't enough to deal with, Lady Jane must also put up with the officers of Scotland Yard, who are very skeptical about this whole vampire business. So, in case you're wondering, the reason why The Return of the Vampire so closely resembles Universal horror is because it was originally conceived as a sequel to Dracula. Naturally, Universal didn't like this idea and threatened to sue Columbia, so they made a few minor changes, waited a couple of years, and then released the movie that we see today. In spite of the similarities remaining, Universal took no further legal action. I will never understand how copyright law works. I have to say that Return of the Vampire is one of the best handled revenge tales that I've ever seen. Usually a revenge tale takes a lot of pleasure reveling in seeing former victims getting back at their attackers. So much so that any attempt to insert a message of revenge is wrong often winds up feeling forced and insincere. Great movie, completely missed the point of the book. In Return, Tesla is already an evil character, being a vampire, and his revenge is made even pettier by way of the fact that he technically deserved what he got in the first place. So the message of revenge is wrong comes across loud and clear. Speaking of Tesla, Bela Lugosi's performance has got to be commended. Yes, he's playing a vampire, but don't think that he's just playing Dracula with a different name. Somehow, he manages to imbue Tesla with a sense of arrogance and evil that is entirely unique and unlike anything we see in The Count.
You're a fool, Andreas, a complete, utter fool. Your fate is to be what you are, but mine is to be what I am.
The differences are subtle, to be sure, but the subtlety works. Meanwhile, Andreas provides one of the few examples of a werewolf who can actually talk while he is in wolf form. I was actually quite surprised to hear him speak the first time I saw him, rather than simply growl and snarl the way werewolves do even today.
She is still alive, Master. I watched her through the window at Dr. Ainsley's sanatorium. She just lies there on a cot, stares up at it, nothing at all.
This is very useful in making Andreas a well-rounded character, especially adding to the tragedy of his life under Tesla's control. He's given one of the best character arcs in the whole movie, and the role he plays in the grand finale honestly had me cheering for him by the end. The film also makes full use of its World War II setting. Most of the action takes place during the Blitzkrieg, a period where London was getting bombed by the Nazis on an almost hourly basis. This is more than a mere aesthetic backdrop, as the bombings actually have drastic effects on the story, including the aforementioned freeing of Tesla into the modern world. And yet somehow the story manages to not be a piece of propaganda. Yeah, you could argue that there's a mild anti-German undercurrent running throughout, but it's hardly noticeable. Believe it or not, The Return of the Vampire actually needs to be respected more as a piece of history, because this is a film of many firsts. It was the first film to feature werewolves that can talk in wolf form. It was the first film to feature werewolves and vampires in the same story. It was the first film to feature vampires in wartime. It was not the first movie to show a vampire dissolving in the sunlight. That honor goes to Nosferatu, but it was the first film to show it in gruesome detail. Well, gruesome for the 40s at any rate. With all that being said, it's actually kind of a shame that this movie is largely forgotten by all but the most die-hard of horror film buffs. Is The Return of the Vampire perfect? Well, no, it has its problems. Frida Inscourt's performance as Lady Jane sometimes lacks emotional depth during key scenes. Her two Poor Andreas speeches in particular sound remarkably flat.
Poor Andreas. What a tragedy to lose his soul again after struggling for so many years to find it.
Poor tortured soul, once again claimed by the evil he tried so hard to put behind him. You just can't get good help anymore these days. Oh well, back to the old Rolodex. The story also has some pretty noticeable plot holes and head-scratchers. Why did Armin Tesla publish a book about how to kill vampires before becoming a vampire himself? How did he become a vampire anyway? And why didn't Lady Jane and Saunders just leave him out to bake in the sunlight way back in 1918? These are questions that are probably going to scratch at your brain, but trust me, they won't detract from the overall viewing experience. So, yeah, go give The Return of the Vampire a stab. If you like old school horror, Bela Lugosi, or you just want a different kind of vampire movie, you can't go wrong with this one. It'll suit you just fine. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omniviewer, signing off.
We've been playing war, sir. Nikki was a German and I killed her.
I hope he didn't kill you very much.